This is presentation 2 for Sport for International Development. This presentation will be based around the sport and physical activity and how they relate to development goals. So, what to expect during the presentation? From the presentation, there will be a greater understanding of what is physical activity. The presentation will outline definitions of physical activity, which will then give a better understanding of what this presentation is about, and it also allows us to link physical activity with development goals. Also, as well as physical activity, we're going to look at how colonialism affected physical activity and when it was introduced around the globe. So, looking at the historic aspect of physical activity, this will give us a better understanding of why physical activity was introduced around the globe to different nations. Also, we're going on about physical activity, we'll look at the impacts it has on nations now. So we'll go from the historic aspect from colonialism to physical activity in the modern day now and impacts it has around the globe. As well as this, we'll look at the development of physical activity in sport around the globe. So how it's increased and what effects there are. And finally, we will be looking at how physical activity and sport relates to development organisations' aims. So that'll come from organisations around the globe setting aims to help sport and development goals. So, what is physical activity? Physical activity is defined as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that require energy expenditure. So this could be from playing a game of football, to rugby, to ice skating, or even just a walk to a local shop. So it can relate to sport, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean sport. Physical inactivity has been identified as the fourth leading risk factor for global mortality, causing an estimated 3.2 million deaths globally. This particular also relates to United Kingdom, as there is a lack of physical activity within schools, but also this shows the problem around the globe and that it isn't just based around England and America where there's concerns on inactivity. So it shows there's a real problem away from England and even away from the high-powered Western nations that participate in physical activity. Also, globally, about 23% of adults and 81% of school-going adolescents are not active enough. So again, this doesn't just link to local or national ones on our behalf, it also looks at international, so countries around the globe. Also as well, in the African region, only 8% to 35% of African youths engaged in sufficient levels of physical activity for 60 minutes a day on at least 5 days per week. So this shows instantly the problems that occur over in Africa, and that there isn't the opportunities and there isn't that knowledge that's needed to give to them about how important physical activity and sport is for health and for also lifestyle as well. So now we look at how physical activity was introduced to nations around the globe and why it was introduced. One way physical activity and sport was introduced to nations around the globe, especially the poorer nations who didn't have the facilities like England and America did, was through colonialism. Colonialism provided massive pathways for introduction of physical activity around the world, with nations being taken over and being influenced by nations such as England and America. This allowed better facilities, better equipment, better opportunity for certain nations to get involved in sport and also use it as a pathway and a lifestyle, as well as not only just gaining health benefits as well. Major nations that were influenced by the British reign and the British colonising were nations such as India and West Indies. Not only them two, but also New Zealand as well. With Britain colonising these nations, it allowed them, like I've just mentioned, to gain better resources and gain better equipment and gain better coaching through the British lifestyle and the British way. So this then helps that nation develop as a country itself by providing sport for locals, by providing job opportunities for locals, by providing money into the nation through sport as well. As you can see, Hewson from 2009 suggests the role of cricket must be regarded as significant to the demise of the British rule in the Caribbean. This suggests that the British rule majorly helped cricket develop within those nations. So it's not only just helping the nations develop, but it also helps the sport around the world develop. So if we sit here today and question if nations weren't colonised and colonialism didn't happen, would sport be the major event around the world? Would it be as big as it is today? Or with colonialism, has it allowed other nations to participate in the sport, which has created a bigger social and worldwide event for people to participate in and watch as well? So we now look at how colonialism impacts sport and physical activity and how it's impacted them over the previous years and the past. So with Britain's colonialism over New Zealand, it allowed them to import sports such as rugby. So as you know from today, rugby is New Zealand's national sport and is the sport that they really concentrate on to develop, as you can tell through the dominance in rugby union and also dominance in rugby league as well. So how did New Zealand really get to play rugby, and how did that all of a sudden become their national sport? Well, Britain took over and invaded New Zealand, which then caused colonialism. So in 1888 and between 1888 and 1889, Britain toured New Zealand to play them in what was called the Native Tour. So this was due with rugby. So this gave the opportunity for the Maori to be introduced into competitive rugby for the first time. So in New Zealand at the time, they were just playing basic rugby, so they were just playing locally teams, playing nationally teams. They didn't have an international team. So this then gave them the opportunity to think, right, let's create a national team and then develop it from there. The rest is history, as we know. When New Zealand retoured back in 1905, they created a new wing-forward formation, which was the first time it was seen away from New Zealand. So instantly now, with Britain colonising New Zealand and introducing sport over there, and introducing rugby over there, it's allowed New Zealand to set up a team and give them a chance to think, right, let's develop ourselves. And when they eventually did retour in the UK and Great Britain, it also develops the game a little bit more because they created a formation that had never been seen by the British before. So instantly it shows, through colonisation, nations have developed not only with people participating, so they've not only developed physical activity, but they've also developed the sport as it is themselves. So, with colonisation and colonialism, it's allowed different sports to be introduced to different nations. So, moving away from New Zealand, really, and the West Indies, it's allowed a greater opportunity for sport and physical activities within nations. So, it's not only allowed nations to develop, but it's also allowed people within nations to develop themselves as well. So, sport and physical activity being introduced to these nations through colonialism, it's allowed people to get involved in sport, it's allowed people to experience different lifestyles and experience different opportunities as well. Because where Britain had invaded and taken over these countries and used their kind of dictatorship within those countries, it's allowed them to realise there is a different option from gang life or other potential threats to their lifestyle usually. Not only this, but sport has also helped to foster loyalty to the imperial government as well. So it's also helped people become loyal to the government in charge, providing the country with a better stability as well. Again, with New Zealand and India, it's allowed nations like those to make names for themselves. For example, New Zealand within rugby and India with cricket as well. So it's allowed nations to gain money into the country through fans of other nations or fans of other teams wanting to go to those countries, either to watch their team or a team from that country themselves participate in sport. Effectively, this helps the economy in those nations, allowing them to develop financially beneficial, and then this might help the nation develop even more. So with sport and physical activity around the globe, it's now around 62% of people play cricket at least 4 times a day in India, a week even in India. So this just shows how important sport is in some nations. Within India, it isn't the richest country in the world, so playing cricket, not only is it fun and enjoyable for them, but it also gives them something to do rather than be sat in slums. We look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia is known for the NGOs and the MDGs creating plans for the nation due to lack of resources. So since 2001, the Great Ethiopian Run, which is the 2 pictures on the right hand side of the screen, is an NGO that has staged over 60 race events for charity. So this charity is an organisation, an NGO, so a non-profit organisation, which sets up races to develop the nation and also to help out the famine and the lack of resources around the world. So not only is it getting a development on the nation, but it's using sport and physical activity as a way to do that, so people enjoy and not just have to pay. People enjoy developing nations through using sport. So finally, we look at how sport and physical activity and sports physical activity development relates to organisations. So NGOs and MDGs both have created goals to use sport to develop nations. So as we saw from the previous slide, the Great Ethiopian Run is set up as an NGO, as a non-profit organisation to develop Ethiopia as a country. So the Great Ethiopian Run website states that the focus has been on taking mass participation races to all corners of Ethiopia, developing capacity in the office and event teams which are staffed by Ethiopians, and working with sponsors on a range of publicity campaigns. So this instantly suggests that the Great Ethiopian Run is creating jobs as well around the globe, around the nation, should I say, because straight away, with them going to all different corners of Ethiopia, and it being staffed by Ethiopians, instantly it provides work, it provides money, it provides something to do for the locals as well. As well as this, it also helps Ethiopians get out of dangerous situations as well, and also gives them the chance to work, gives them the chance to earn decent hard-earned money instead of being left as a farmer earning pretty much nothing and letting other rich nations such as the US, the UK and Russia take their resources and pay them as little as possible. As well as this, there's the Right to Play organisation as well. Right to Play looks at play-based programs which teach children how to live safe and healthy lives while providing them with the tools to become leaders in the communities. Attached to this slide as well is a video on a little bit of work that Right to Play do and a little bit more behind them. The pictures also show that they use sport as a tool to provide nations and to provide an understanding for children especially how to live a safer and healthier life. So they're using sport to develop the goal of reducing risks of death and reduce risks of crime within nations as well. So looking at the two organisations set out there, they're both non-profit organisations, they both use sport as a tool to develop certain nations within certain areas as well. So they use sport to develop countries and to develop the people within countries. So overall, we've looked at the history of physical activity and how it was introduced, how it's impacted nations as well, and also the NGOs and the organisations involved in sport and physical activity, and how physical activity is used to help organisations such as Right to Play and the Great Ethiopian Run to reach their goals that they have set.